Glazed, cake, cruller, frosted, and sprinkled, Dunkin has a donut for just about every occasion. They basically invented the grab-and-go breakfast with their coffee and donut combo, and you'll now find them serving early birds at more than 13,000 shops across 30 countries. Today, we're taking a closer look at what goes into these golden rings of dough and their bite-sized companions. So grab a coffee and snag some Munchkins, because we're rolling inside to see just how America runs on Dunkin. During the first half of the 20th century, grabbing a quick breakfast of coffee and donuts simply wasn't the norm, until a visionary by the name of Bill Rosenberg would change that forever. By 1946, Rosenberg was running a fleet of lunch trucks in Quincy, Massachusetts, when he noticed his fresh Arabica coffee and donuts made up nearly half his sales. Spotting the trend, he opened a no-frills bakery called the Open Kettle in 1948, dedicated entirely on selling what customers clearly liked, coffee and donuts. While manning the counter, he noticed that some customers had a habit of dunking their donuts into their coffee. So Rosenberg embraced the idea and renamed the Open Kettle as the first Dunkin Donuts in 1950. But success didn't come instantly. To draw in more customers, Rosenberg unveiled 52 donut varieties, far more than any other bakery at the time. And the lineup created a colorful display case, tempting customers to take home a mix instead of just one flavor. From that moment on, Dunkin became more than just a donut shop. It became a morning ritual. So let's step inside one of their modern kitchens and see how a few favorites are made. Behind the counter, Dunkin has 3 different ways of getting their donuts to customers. Some shops knead and fry them fresh each morning, while others have trays delivered from a regional factory, and smaller shops like Dunkin Express often stock frozen batches that are reheated on site. The method chosen usually comes down to management preference and available store space. All of them start with one of 2 batter types, yeast or cake. Yeast donuts are soft and fluffy and easy to spot by the faint ring around their middle, while the cake donuts have a heavier, more solid texture and firmer bite. First, we'll check out how the cake donuts are mixed and fried in the store's kitchen. Then, we'll look at the yeast versions and finish with the toppings. So, in the words of Fred the baker,
time to make the donuts.
Dunkin's cake donut batter starts with 42 ounces of water, mixed with 100 ounces of their secret proprietary premix. That includes wheat flour, nutmeg, non-fat dry milk, egg powder, sugar, and salt. Once it's mixed, there's no waiting. The batter has to be used right away. It's loaded into a specialized tool called the Belshaw Donut Plunger, which Dunkin introduced back in 2002 to streamline the process and keep each donut looking exactly the same. And for a consistent cook time across every batch, a timer is set for 30 seconds, while the baker turns the crank on the donut plunger. 1 ring of batter drops every second into a blend of palm, soy, and cottonseed oils heated to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. They sizzle in the oil for 45 seconds. Then another timer allows 10 seconds for flipping, followed by another 45 seconds to finish the other side. Once they've turned golden, they're lifted out of the oil and arranged on this cooling rack, ready to be glazed, frosted, or powdered. But we'll get to that step in a moment. The chocolate cake donut batter starts with the same proprietary dry premix, but this time it's blended with cocoa powder to bring out that rich chocolatey flavor. The batter is loaded into the plunger depositor, which releases uniform rings straight into the hot palm oil. They fry for 1.5 minutes on each side, before being lifted out, cooled, and set aside for the finishing touches. The cake munchkins start with the same batter as the cake donuts, except the plunger's nozzle is designed to release 4 bite-sized portions with just 1 turn of the handle. After hitting the palm oil, another frying screen holds them beneath the surface as they sizzle for about 3 minutes. They're then lifted up and left to cool on the screen for 20 minutes until it's time for toppings, which we'll get to shortly. To make the French crullers, Dunkin bakers begin with a choux pastry mix, enriched with a higher egg content to produce a donut that's especially light and airy. And just like the cake batter, the mixture needs to be immediately fried once it's prepared. The choux batter goes into a Belshaw donut plunger fitted with a nozzle designed specifically for crullers. Turning the crank forces the perfect amount of batter through the ridged ring, shaping those characteristic vertical swirls. While in the hot oil, the higher egg content releases steam within, forming air pockets that make the crullers puff dramatically. This also gives them a custard-like center, with a tender structure that practically melts in each bite. Each side fries for 2 minutes and 45 seconds in the 375-degree palm oil. Then the crullers are removed to drain and cool before heading off for toppings. Making the yeast-raised donut dough requires a few more steps than preparing the cake or cruller batters. The process starts with Dunkin's proprietary premix of wheat flour, non-fat milk powder, egg powder, dough conditioners, and stabilizers. A baker combines the premix with active yeast and water, using a commercial floor mixer that kneads it into a smooth, elastic dough. This dough rests in a proof box for 10 minutes at around 90 degrees and 80% humidity, expanding to twice its original size, creating the light structure that defines this style of donut. The risen dough is then fed through this sheeter machine, rolling repeatedly until it reaches about a ½ an inch thick. Switching to cut mode, rollers on the sheeter uses concentric blades to punch out both the donut rings and munchkins with one stamp. The raw dough rings are then arranged on this frying screen, then go back into the proof box for another session lasting about 45 minutes. This second rise develops that pillowy, fluffy texture we expect from a yeast donut. After proofing, the screens of dough rings go directly into the 375-degree palm oil. They fry for 45 seconds, are flipped with donut sticks, then fry another 45 seconds before being lifted out to drain on the cooling rack, ready for decorations. Filled yeast donuts start from the same dough as the regular rings, except the roll cutter doesn't have the center hole punch and stamps out solid rounds of dough. Following the same 45-minute proof box session, the rounds are fried for at least 3 minutes per side, allowing their centers to cook all the way through. They're then set aside to cool, waiting for their injected fillings and frostings that come next. Yeast Munchkins begin by manually collecting the dough centers from the stamped-out donut dough. A baker then arranges the centers on the frying screen before lowering them into the hot oil. For approximately 1½ minutes, they're agitated, rolled, and held beneath the surface with another frying screen for even cooking. Once cooked through, they're lifted out and set aside to drain and cool. And here's a fun fact. Munchkins first came about in 1972, Hartford, Connecticut, when store manager Edna Demry came up with a simple but brilliant idea. Instead of throwing away the dough cutouts, why not sell them as their own treat? Her clever idea to repurpose the scrap dough quickly went from an in-store novelty to one of Dunkin's biggest hits, selling over 2 million per day. Dunkin's coffee roll is their take on the classic cinnamon roll, and it starts with the yeast dough being pressed through the sheeter, then shaped into a rectangle on this floured surface. A water spritz comes first, followed by a generous dusting of cinnamon distributed over the entire sheet while keeping the bottom edge clear. Then, the outer edges are spritzed again. Folding begins at the top edge, continuing repeatedly down the dough sheet until forming a round loaf. The loaf is divided into 3-ounce slices, which are arranged uniformly on the frying screen. Following a 45-minute proof box session, they go into the oil for 2 minutes on each side. Once golden, they're lifted out, dusted with cinnamon, and finished with a sweet glaze. With the leftover yeast dough scraps, the bakers will typically recycle it into making other goodies like apple fritters. They compile about 5 pounds of scrap dough on a floured workspace, layer it with 1 pound of apple filling, a generous shake of cinnamon, and scatter 4 to 5 ounces of flour on top. Using a bench knife, the mixture is chopped and folded until everything is combined into uneven chunks. The glob is shaped into a loaf, then cut into 3-ounce portions. Each portion is dusted with flour, arranged on a donut screen, and proofed for 45 minutes. They're lowered into 375-degree palm oil, and because of their heft and density, they need to fry for at least 3 minutes on each side. Once fried through, the fritters are lifted, given a sprinkle of cinnamon, and coated with the icing. Now comes the moment everyone's been waiting for, the toppings. Dunkin is known for its lineup that stretches well beyond 52 flavors. But for time's sake, we'll just stick to the fan favorites like glazed, frosted, Boston cream, and jelly powdered. The still warm cake donuts are taken to the glazing screen. Then, a large ladle is dipped in the icing and poured across the donuts, drenching them in a sweet waterfall of sugary goodness. Cake donuts that are powdered or cinnamon-coated are placed in this large bin and jostled around until each side has an even, flavorful coat. The cake munchkins get the same sweet treatment as their larger counterparts, giving the bite-sized treats a smooth, glossy shell of sweetness. Crullers are finished with a glaze as well, settling beautifully into the ridges, dripping down for that signature look. Next up are the Yeast Donuts. These make up the majority of Dunkin's donut sales, so the topping options here are much broader. Naturally, the lineup begins with the classic glaze, wrapping each donut in a sweet, glistening finish that's instantly recognizable. Top frosted yeast donuts are prepared at this dedicated prep table. Each one is flipped upside down, then lowered into the frosting, whether it's chocolate, strawberry, or vanilla, then flipped right side up again. And in some kitchens, the baker still hand dips each donut in the frosting, then decorates with rainbow sprinkles before arranging them on the display tray. During the holidays, you'll also see themed frostings, such as pumpkin spice in the fall or peppermint and gingerbread in winter. Next, the Yeast Munchkins receive their rich coating of smooth, sweet glaze. But this isn't it. There's actually 9 Munchkin varieties, and you'll never find them all in one store. The lineup includes butternut, cinnamon, blueberry glazed, chocolate glazed, jelly-filled, powdered sugar, old-fashioned glazed, and yeast glazed. The yeast-filled donuts are next in line. To keep it simple, we'll just cover 2 of Dunkin's best sellers, Boston cream and jelly powdered. While there are plenty of other options like chocolate cream and apple and spice, the filling process is essentially the same for all of them. At the heart of every Boston cream is a Bavarian-style custard that's supplied pre-made by a third-party vendor. It's typically made with milk, sugar, corn syrup, egg yolks, and vanilla, thickened with starch for that smooth custard consistency. In the kitchen, bags of the filling are loaded into the hopper of this electric pastry injector. The yeast donut shells are pressed onto the spouts, where a measured shot of custard is injected into each one. Then the filled donuts move to the frosting prep table. Each shell is inverted, dipped in rich chocolate icing, then returned upright, finished as one of Dunkin's most popular creations. The filling for jelly donuts is also prepared off-site, and it's most commonly raspberry or strawberry flavored. It's generally made with granulated sugar and corn syrup for sweetness and body, plus pectin to give it a thick, jam-like texture. Once the jelly is loaded into the hopper of the pastry filler, the attachment is switched out. The yeast shells are pressed onto the spouts, then injected with a measured dose. After that, they're dropped into a container of powdered sugar and tumbled around until completely covered. With their finishing touches complete, the fresh donuts make their way to Dunkin's colorful display case, ready to tempt customers with over 52 varieties on deck. Whether you crave a simple ring, a filled treat, or something covered in sprinkles, there's a flavor to fit every mood and moment. There's no doubt that Dunkin' Donuts reshaped the way we start our mornings. They turned coffee and donuts into the definition of a lunch break, with their early marketing campaigns promoting a coffee paired with a snack that actually coined the phrase, coffee break. And thanks to Bill Rosenberg's vision of 52 varieties, he turned a simple treat into a full-on experience, with choice, tradition, and a bit of fun. Which Dunkin' variety tops your list? Drop your favorite in the comments. Thanks for watching Made Vision. We'll catch you on the next one.